Welcome back. Here we are. This is going to be part 2 of looking at this great Skylon mod, looking at the great KSP mod, Skylon. In here we are, you see our background has changed, and this is my modded install. This is with the FAR, totally changing the aerodynamics that this space plane has to work in, and also very significantly, this is with the scaled up Kerbin, 6.4 times the size of the stock game. You can see mountains over there. They're just way, way, way over there. Okay, so in adapting this thing to, in adapting this airplane to work with FAR, we run into an issue. Our first issue that we're looking at is even if everything is working perfectly correctly, if we turn on our center of mass, that's good. Center of mass is right in the middle of the payload bay where it belongs. Turn on center of lift, and our center of lift is in front of the center of mass. Anybody who's done any kind of designing space planes, aircraft in this game, whether using FAR or not, you know having that center of lift in front of the center of mass is a problem. Now, I believe that the real vehicle is intended to work through this as it's just going to be very, very smart. It has a great deal of very precise control over these canards working as the elevators. So even if it doesn't have aerodynamic stability, this will be able to give it stable enough pitch control in order to work. And of course, it will have that more efficient lift coming from having canards instead of the more traditional cruciform tail and back. However, I didn't want to work with it. I didn't want to work with that instability. I know that there are mods available in order to give you better control over things that are not naturally stable in the aerodynamics, but modded PID controllers. However, I don't want to go that route. I would rather have something that actually makes sense. So it makes sense to my more, I guess, more stodgy, crusty old Dodger, whatever. Crusty old codger, Dodger, whatever you want to call me. I like having a more conventional tail, and I just know it's going to work. Here's our center of mass, is still where it needs to be. Center of lift is behind the center of mass, and that makes a great deal of sense. I made these, it's an all-moving tail. For pitch, I was running into issues of high angles of attack that the vehicle was wandering around in yaw. It was unstable that way. So I gave it, again, this is just using procedural wing parts. I gave it another vertical stabilizer on the ventral surface, another little rudder down there. And I ran into another issue that with the vertical stabilizer that comes with the mod, the FAR configuration for it looks like it should be correct. However, it doesn't fly right, actually, in the game. There is some issue going on. There's speculation that maybe it has to do with the fact that all these wing pieces attach via stack nodes, and they have the center of mass, actually in the middle of the part rather than at the roots. And maybe that's the issue. For whatever reason, there is a bug, and FAR is not working with the vertical stabilizer that came with the mod. So I made one out of procedural parts, and procedural wing parts, and it pretty much works. The other change that we had to do for the 6.4 scale is a whole crap ton more fuel. What do we have here in the center part with our liquid oxygen? Got, what, 21,500 units? I think that's liters. I'm really not certain what the units are. Anyway, 21,500 units of liquid oxygen, which means we need 43,000 liquid hydrogen to work with that. Each one of these, 23.25. So I've got a total of, 46.5 thousand. So yeah, that's a few thousand hydrogen that will not be combusted with the oxygen. That hydrogen is for use in atmospheric flight. With this, I've loaded the thing up with, let's open that up, just one of my conventional test weights, 15 tons of lead ballast. That's supposed to represent a space station component or whatever other kind of 15-ton payload you might want. And loaded all up, the entire vehicle weighs 224 tons, which is a lot. thing, it can get off the ground before the end of the runway, but it does so just barely. In case anybody's wondering whether these fuel amounts are realistic and or realistic or not, do they work with the do they work with our conventional understanding? I took one of these procedural tanks, and I gave it the same resource, and I gave it the 5-meter diameter, and I made it as long. Anyway, I matched it with those, and this thing, if you show tank GUI, if I fill this thing totally up with liquid hydrogen, it gives me numbers that are just orders of magnitude above what this is. So yes, these numbers are, this actually has room to spare. Another way of looking at it is that if you're doing things working with procedural real fuels, if you're doing things working with procedural tanks, maybe the Skylon doesn't actually have to be this big. So either the math here is wrong, or more likely the math in the procedural tank is wrong when you get to really large sizes like that. Something weird's going on. In any case, we're sticking with this vehicle as is. Let's open up that FAR window. Thing I want to do is I want to control from here, make certain that's in the Saber vector. You notice that the mark on our nav ball is the Saber vector is actually slightly above where the nose of the airplane is pointing. SAS is on. I also want to give it a little bit of pitch trim, preliminary. Okay, so the plan for today, I want to take this is pretty much the maximum payload for it, is 15 tons. Once I did get a 20-ton payload into a 100-kilometer orbit, but that's very low orbit, and it just barely made it. I'm not going to count on being able to do that reliably. But yeah, we're going to take 15-ton payload, and I want to put it into a 200-kilometer orbit. Let's go. Oops, stage. Yeah, that's right. There we go. I will note that the weird issue with this vehicle wanting to yaw to the right on the... here it's wanting to do it right now. Actually, stop. We're going to revert flight. This is a weird thing that's happening with this, and I will note still, this mod is a work in progress. Let's revert it. Talk while I'm reverting. Is that sometimes it just doesn't want to track straight down the runway, even with the SAS on. I don't know why. I'm not going to pretend to have the answer to why that thing is happening. I just know that it does sometimes, other times it doesn't. And so I've just decided that whenever I see it start to work, I'm just going to go revert the flight, and odds are pretty good that the next attempt it won't. So I'll give it, I mean, it always does yaw to one side some, but eventually it won't be too much. It'll be controllable. Okay, here we go. So when we see equivalent airspeed get up there around 125, pitch back, keep on accelerating, we'll get off the ground between, say, about 170 meters per second to 180. Pull that gear up immediately. I want to throttle back a little bit so I don't over-G the thing in this, as I do this big pitch-up maneuver for this big climb that I want to do. Come on. You can see the equivalent airspeed climbing. It gets, see, just, I'm using keyboard, I'm not using joystick. Maybe I should start trying to use joystick more for this. Okay, and now, as we climb, okay, now I want to start giving it progressively smaller, gentler corrections, and as we get into supersonic flight, we'll end up managing it mostly with pitch trim. And let's start accelerating some more. Okay. And climbing away. So, take a look. We need 43,000 hydrogen to work with the oxygen. So we've got 3,500 that we can work with just for the climb while in the atmosphere. Let's do some more pitch trim backwards. Get more climb going. And just giving very, very small touches of roll and yaw. We'll try and keep it lined up on that 90-degree line. Okay, so the target that I'm looking for, once this thing gets up there to about 20 kilometers of altitude, we'll start gradually pitching forward, and I want to level out around 30 kilometers of altitude and do my acceleration there. We'll probably accelerate up to about Mach 4.6, or which works out being about 1,800 meters per second orbital speed. This is just trial and error, doing lots of different iterations of this vehicle in this setup, and that is what seems to work. Okay, so there's 19 kilometers, and actually not touching the pitch, we gradually see our direction vector getting down closer to that horizon. Okay, let's start pitch trim forward a little bit. Very, very small changes are all that's called for here. Also trying to correct the inclination error. Do a little bit more pitch forward. Okay, and now let's start pitching back again. As we're about to run out of climb and we're not up to 30 kilometers. Okay, is that too much pitch or is that going to work? Okay, we actually need a little bit more than that. Come on, airplane, you can do it. Interestingly, the documentation that, the real vehicle is planned to climb to around 28 kilometers of altitude and accelerate to about Mach 5.1, 5.2? I don't remember the exact number. But it's interesting to me that this model is, just all these different components coming together with this mod and with the modded atmosphere and the modded planet and everything, that our numbers work out being so similar. That is intriguing to me. I should note that I have a custom configuration on my deadly reentry. I've decided to set this because there's no way of telling what is, at least no way that I know of, that I can tell what is perfectly realistic, and I'm not certain I want perfectly realistic anyway. Balanced for gameplay, I set up deadly reentry so that at the higher altitudes, the higher Mach numbers, that 150 meters per second of equivalent airspeed equals about 1,000 degrees Celsius. Yeah, coming up on 1,750 meters per second, about Mach 4.5. We're very close to where we need to be. We've got 1,100 hydrogen fuel to spare, and inclination is off. Let's see if we can get over to the other side of that line. Pitch trim forward a little bit more. Okay, see, small change on the control, but makes a big change in this. Okay, we've exceeded 1,800. That was one mark that I was looking for. We're above 30 kilometers. We're above Mach 4.6. We have less than 1,000 hydrogen to play with. And we're starting to get kind of squirrely. Wobbling around, starting to drop again. Tell you what, let's center it on the 90-degree line, hit SAS, and switch modes. Okay, gone to closed cycle mode, significantly more thrust. I'll do a big pitch up maneuver to try and gain a lot of altitude very fast. I want to see that direction marker get, say, 10 degrees above the horizon. And we'll see that our timed apoapsis is also climbing a great deal. Pulling more than 3 Gs. Throttle back some. Yeah, right about there. Okay, and then I'll start pitching forward to do more efficient burn. Actually throttle up again. And kill that trim. Good. Yeah, inclination is perfect. Here's right at 3 Gs. We'll just keep throttling back just slightly. Time to apoapsis is increasing. That's good. And we'll see that our... If I'd been paying attention to the temperature the whole time, you would have seen it at peak right around 900 and something degrees and then start to drop again. So that all works out very fine. Let's go to orbital. Orbital speed, keep an eye on that. Yeah, at this point there's hardly any altitude to work with, so it ceases being an exercise in flying an airplane in this unusual flight regime, extreme high altitude, extreme high speeds, and it's just like flying any other launcher in the game. And shut the engine down. Okay, 10 minutes to get there. What do we have? 625 in the tank. I bet you it'll take, what, like 300 Yeah. Let's go ahead and set up this maneuver node, even though I usually don't. I really want to make this right. It doesn't have a lot of delta V to play with, but it does have enough to be useful. If I made the vehicle any heavier, if I gave it more fuel to give it more delta V, then it would not be able to get off the runway in time. It can just barely get off the runway as it is. One action group to open up the payload bays and also to open up our solar panels. Let me see, what am I looking for? I'm looking for 200 kilometers. Let's burn. It's getting kind of out of control, isn't it? You know, that got... Let's just take our time with that. It's kind of sloppy. We're in orbit, but I actually want to... Okay, at this point, stage again. And that lights our orbital engine. Shut down the sabers. Turn SAS off. Go here and change mode. Watch how this changes the nav ball whenever I change mode. Couldn't do that. Go to orbital engine. Okay, good. I want to get to a more circular orbit. I have delta V to spare, really. You know, a test launch I did before recording this, I did the same thing, and I ended up with only 300 meters per second of delta V in this same orbit. So you can see that it just matters how you fly the ascent and launch. That's makes a huge difference as to how much delta V you end up in your final orbit. And this time, actually, that is enough delta V. I know, just prior experience, that I could take this up another 100 kilometers into the higher orbit, into my my current space station's 300-kilometer orbit, and I could drop this payload off there and still come back for the re-entry and landing. As one thing, I think it would be a fairly simple configuration change. Again, I was reading the manual for this vehicle, and I learned that the RCS system is planned to use exactly the same fuel as the engines. The RCS is going to use the same hydrogen and liquid oxygen. So, you know, Kerbal Space Program has taught us all that to expect to use a different resource for your reaction control, but the real vehicles don't necessarily all work like that. And actually, considering doing that change, you'd have to keep an eye on your fuel and consider how that's going to change your overall delta V, your delta V reservoir as you use RCS. But it would simplify it, and you wouldn't need, especially I guess monopropellant is unrealistically heavy, or something like that. Do a little bit of burning. I just want to drop that thing down to 200. Yep, right about there. You have to always keep in mind, the way I've configured this, and this is, by the way, is not part of the mod, this is just the way I decided to put together, with because I thought it looked cool to put the solar panels up there. You always have to keep in mind, do the solar panels actually have access to the sun? I suppose it'd be equally, you know, it'd probably be the much easier way to deal with it is just stick a couple of RTGs inside the payload bay. I kind of just didn't want to do that. Let's actually click that prograde button. I still have to remind myself to make use of these markers over here. I am still not accustomed to them. I quite often forget to use them. Okay, slow it down. Oh, that's interesting. As soon as I kill the time compression, I'm on the other side of that apoapsis. Do some burning. Yep, okay. That is certainly acceptably close to being circular. It's just like a 1 kilometer off. So let's deposit our payload here, why don't we? Let's do this decouple node. Oddly enough, in this case, whenever I've been playing around with this vehicle and its predecessors, the weird undocking bug isn't here. The undocking is working perfectly fine, but when using other vehicles, when using anything attached to my space station and anything the vehicle that I have that I set up to deliver 3 Kerbals in a capsule, that one, it just won't undock from anything, and I do not know why. That's now that I've spent a whole bunch of days working on this specific vehicle here. Now I need to start seeking answers to that question, the whole undocking bug. There it is. We need the waltz music from 2001. Looks pretty cool. Okay, let's see. I think I want to start setting this up for a re-entry. Not going to waste any time up here. I believe in this model that we don't have the problem with the hydrogen boiling off. But that is something that would be a very much a concern for a real Skylon. And I know that they in the manual they specifically state that the thing is designed, that it's intended to stay in orbit no more than just 1 or 2 days. You know, comes back, it goes up there, does its job immediately, and then comes back. First, I want to drop this thing down to a 100-kilometer orbit, and then we'll set this up for a re-entry. Looks fairly retrograde to me. Whee! Okay, hang on, what's happening here? What? Why am I losing pitch control? Okay, right. Oh, I see. It's this damn thing catching me off guard again. How many times has that happened? Come on, guys. Point retrograde. Oh, that's irritating. Okay, let's try this again. I mean, it does wander a little bit. The marker isn't perfectly lined up with the thrust vector from that engine. It's really close, though. It's close enough. You can deal with it. I'm certain it'd probably be possible to just go from a direct re-entry from this higher orbit. It's just something that I haven't practiced. Hey, we're right over Kerbal Space Center. Hello. And, you know, I've figured out how to get this thing back to Kerbal Space Center, but the way I did it was, you know, starting from a 100-kilometer orbit, so I don't feel like changing anything in that respect right now. Okay, 98.6, 101.2, definitely close enough. One thing I have noticed is that Kerbal Engineer doesn't know how to deal with these engines changing modes, and sometimes we're running 2 engines, sometimes we're running on this one little engine. And so things like whenever I had a maneuver node set up and Kerbal Engineer gives me the estimated burn time, it isn't dealing with it well. It isn't dealing with it correctly. So now thinking about this re-entry and landing, let me see, KSC is in daylight, whereas previously I mean, usually I put a couple of flags here at the runway, and I was playing games. I was setting a target and waiting for a specific number of degrees before I got there, and still wasn't hitting the runway because apparently there's a system. It doesn't know where they are. I've gone back. We're doing it kind of old school. Last time, I just waited till I was over this little piece of land, and I burned retrograde 100 meters per second, and I came down almost to Kerbal Space Center. And just powered flight the rest of the way. So I just need to go a little bit further than that, say just a little bit past the ground. Well, how about even with this little peninsula sticking out there? How about that thing, huh? Okay, so let's go ahead and do some fast forwarding. Not that much, not that much. Oh. And actually, we're almost there. I'm just going to hit it right now. So, 454, I'm going to take that down to 354. I like this little orbital engine. It's like, it's the little engine that could, you know? It isn't as big and sexy as these others over here. But it just gets the job done. Right there. Good. Okay. So, let's go ahead and hit this button to close everything back up. Shut down the orbital engine, relight the sabers, just all this configuration for re-entry and landing. I want to click this thing has 2 control cores. I'm going to control from here. The way this works, the very front control core is actually aligned with the direction of travel of the whole vehicle. The second control core has 2 different vectors, as we've seen, one for the sabers, one for the orbital engine. So I usually launch with the sabers, use the orbital vector in orbit, and then for re-entry and any further atmospheric flight, the forward control core 1. Okay, let's turn this thing around. Open up my FAR window, thank you. Tell you what, let's go ahead and open up my nano gauges as well. Even though, in its current configuration, there's only one of these numbers that interests me, really, and that will be the vertical speed, but just that one's enough. Let's shift engine mode, just in case I forget to do that later. Almost got it pointing the right way, and I'm almost completely out of monopropellant now. It turns out to be a whole lot easier to re-enter than some of the previous space planes, because it will slow down sufficiently. I mean, it's so big and it has so much surface area that it's presenting to the relative wind, you know, even though it is all streamlined, that yeah, it'll slow down perfectly fine without having to do a whole lot of these really dramatic S-turns and everything. So yeah, I'm just going to leave it pointed straight ahead until I get enough airspeed where it looks like it might be getting too high, and then I'm going to pitch up some. I'm not going to mess around with a whole bunch of S-turns. The vehicle, it doesn't need it. I'm not saying that the real one won't, but in Kerbal Space Program it doesn't. As you know, as long as I'm in the high Mach number, say above Mach 5, as long as I keep my equivalent airspeed, here we are, as long as I keep that below 150 meters per second, it won't be too hot. And so we've got almost 2,000 units of liquid hydrogen to use. That, I believe that's probably enough. You probably fly halfway around the planet on that. Approaching 1 G of deceleration. Yeah, this would be uncomfortable. See, there's our temperature just hitting 500 degrees. If we're a passenger, that's one kind of downside to doing things this way. So as we're approaching 100 meters per second, we do this, and let me pitch back some. Actually, not just pitch back just slightly. Let's actually kill that SAS, and I just want to fly this thing with pitch trim. Okay, it's approaching 1,000, but again, 1,000 isn't our ultimate temperature range. Yeah, it's going to exceed it. I need it to be a little more proactive with my pitch up and deceleration, but we can see our vertical speed is changing, so that's good. It's not going to exceed 1,000 by much. Already down to Mach 8.5. Still decelerating over 2 Gs. Pitch up a little bit more. Yeah, temperature, I believe we can safely ignore that temperature from here on in. Okay, well, we can definitely already see our target landing area there. That's already looking like this is better aimed than my previous unrecorded effort. I ended up flying, you know, having to do powered flight across half the continent. Slowing down, approaching just Mach 5 at just over 30 kilometers of altitude. So here's the flight regime, the same flight regime that we were in already during launch. Let's do some more pitch trim. Yeah, looking kind of likely we're probably going to overshoot some, but again, that's the value of doing this with being able to run the engines up. We can turn around. Alright, we're down to Mach 3.5 and slowing. Nice, more comfortable 1 G of deceleration. Equivalent airspeed is above 200. Let's start pitch trimming back a little bit more so as not to let that equivalent airspeed get away from us. Yeah, it's looking likely we're going to overshoot some. We'll turn around and come back. Or I suppose I could start doing some kind of S-turn type maneuver here, but really, I just don't want to get really excited doing these big dramatic maneuvers. We're still here at supersonic speed. Pitch trim forward a little bit more. Do faster descent. There's our equivalent airspeed increasing again. Pretty soon we're going to hit Mach 1.2, and I need to pay particular attention to the pitch control as things will start getting strange. Yeah, there, see, it's trying to pitch up, so we'll trim forward some as we're approaching Mach 1.2. But the vehicle is very stable flying through the transonic region. A whole lot better than a lot of the things that I've designed. It's almost like, you know, real engineers designed this one. Back just a little bit to kind of level out a little bit. Or not quite level out, but just not drop as fast. Okay, we're about to exit the transonic region pretty soon. We are below Mach 0.8. We are officially out of the transonic, and we are now subsonic. Yeah, this has been my goal in a lot of these vehicles. I kind of accidentally nailed it right here. My goal has always been to slow down to subsonic just as I pass over Kerbal Space Center. So I'm pretty pleased about that, even if it was pretty much, you know, accidental. Aim for an approach airspeed. We usually like it, say, about 125, and then as we descend, just before landing, we slow it down. Usually a touchdown, say, around 90. Yeah, starting to slow down a bit much at this point. Let's actually light the engines. It just needs barely any thrust. You can see already we're regaining that airspeed that we lost earlier. Okay, no, we've got this turn working just about correctly, although I am fast. All right, throttle to 0 again. Level out right about here. Good, and let's stick that gear out. There's some landing gear. You can see our airspeed dropping dramatically with all that drag. So let's add a little bit of power and more pitch trim back. Okay, a little bit more power, please. Let's not be slowing this much. Takes the engines, you know, the engines don't spool up just immediately. Takes them a little bit. Okay. Flying this airplane, I found it turns into just constantly managing that pitch trim. That ends up being my primary control, almost. That's what I mess with more than anything else. Yeah, we've got the throttle and the trim setting just about right. Okay, so now we are descending and slowing at the same time. I like it. Okay, try to pitch up more, ease into the flare. Over the numbers, chop throttle. And allow it just to settle on down. Oop, okay, kind of a hop on landing. Not the most elegant landing, but it worked. And it stops almost immediately. Brakes are very good. Okay, well, that was entirely successful. I am pleased with it. This is a good space plane. It's a good mod. I really like this thing. It is fun to fly. Yeah, you have to actively pilot it a whole lot, you know, and that is fun. And it's you know, it's based on realistic concepts, so it's you know, it's not any kind of fantasy tech. It's something that really can work in the real world eventually. Okay, it's been pleasant talking to all you fine people. I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.